It's that time again. It's GoPro firmware update time. Now, I don't know if you get as excited as I do, but I get pretty excited when I connect my GoPro to my GoPro app on my phone, and the app tells me there's a new firmware update available for my GoPro. Now, the firmware version update that I'm referring to is version 1.20, and it was released a couple days ago on November 8th, and I promptly installed it, and I've used the Hero 11 a bunch since installing it. That way I can feel out if there's any issues that I encounter after installing the firmware update. But one of the things I get really excited about with the firmware updates is looking at the list of what GoPro added or corrected with that firmware update. And this one is a doozy. This one has a long list of things that GoPro has added or corrected. So I'm going to go through that today, and I'm going to briefly talk about each of those items, and I'm going to tell you what I have found after installing the firmware update. So let's dive in. So the first category here is bug fixes, and there's quite a list there. The first one that's mentioned is connectivity improvements. So that's not super specific, but what I believe they are probably referring to is probably just the general Bluetooth and Wi-Fi connectivity between the Hero 11 and other devices. So some devices that come to mind are connecting them to my iPhone. When I made the connection between my phone and GoPro after the firmware update, it did seem to be a little bit snappier. The Bluetooth seemed to connect a couple seconds faster, and the Wi-Fi also seemed to as well. Now maybe that was just coincidence, but that did seem to work better. The next one is a big one. GoPro states this firmware fixes the bug that was preventing you from using the Hero 11 to live stream on YouTube. So if you notice before this firmware update, if you went to the live streaming portion of the Quick app, YouTube was grayed out. You couldn't even click on it to live stream. You could use any of the other options, but not YouTube. So after installing the firmware update, I went into the Quick app and I clicked on the live stream option down at the bottom. And sure enough, the YouTube option was now available. So I went into there, I plugged in my settings, and I did a test live stream, and it worked. So sure enough, this firmware did fix that live streaming issue. I know several of you have talked to me about that in comments, and I was hoping GoPro was going to fix that, and sure enough, they have. So live streaming is now an option on the Hero 11. The next fix, it says fixes multiple bugs when the GoPro Hero 11 is used with the media mod. So I didn't particularly notice any major issues when I had used it with my media mod. I had noticed sometimes the mic level seemed really low on there. It seemed like the Hero 11 was not fully detecting the audio levels. So I did notice after using it after the firmware update, the mic levels seem to be jumping appropriately. When volume is louder, they seem to be going all the way to the right, and when it's quieter, they seem to be on the left. So that was a positive, and that's both with the media mod mic and with my external mic. It seemed to work correctly with both. And one thing I had noticed before, sometimes my GoPro would be unresponsive when in the media mod. So now when I have it in the media mod and attached to my Volta here, it's responsive. There weren't any lockups, there weren't any delays in that responsiveness. So I expect that's probably the biggest issue that GoPro is referring to, but I haven't noticed any negative changes after installing the firmware with the media mod, so that is a plus. And by the way, when you do install the firmware update, I highly recommend just having your GoPro, the actual camera. I don't recommend having it connected to the media mod or the Volta or anything else when you do the firmware update. There was a time on the Hero 10 where if you did the firmware update when it was plugged into the media mod, there would be an issue after the fact. It would reboot repeatedly, and that may or may not have been the fault of the media mod, but I found that when I did the update again with it not in the media mod, it worked fine. So maybe that was coincidence, but I suspect it's probably a good idea to just have the GoPro as is and not have it connected to any other accessories when doing the update. The next bug fix is it fixed a webcam detection bug. I have not really used the Hero 11 much as a webcam. I did a little bit of testing with it just to see if it worked. It did. So I didn't really see any bugs there, but it sounds like maybe that detection bug was depending on like the computer you were plugging it into or something like that. But I plugged it in again, it works fine, there's no issues there. So I'm gonna say that it's probably fixed that issue. If you had that issue, hopefully it has fixed it for you as well. The next bug that's fixed is it fixed a bug where burst, that would be in the photo mode, it provided the wrong number of photos. So I didn't ever see this issue. If I told burst to do 10 photos in 1 second or in 3 seconds, it did so properly. Now I didn't try every single time interval and burst count combination. So it's possible that there were some of those combinations where it would maybe provide like 9 photos instead of 10, or 29 photos instead of 30, or 31 instead of 30. But I didn't see the issue before the firmware update, and when testing it after the firmware update, no issues there either. So if you had that issue, hopefully it's been fixed for you as well. The next fix listed here is fixes connection bug for wired offload. So I think what it was referring to here is when you plug this in wired to your computer, an iPad, or another device, the wired offload wasn't always working. And I did have that problem with my iPad. When I plugged it in a couple times, it wasn't always detecting the device, and the offload wasn't always working properly. So I'm pleased to say after this update, so far, it's been working properly. And then of course, the last one on the list is the notorious other bug fixes. So somewhere at GoPro, I'm picturing there is some employee there that has a spreadsheet of like 100 items on there that are lots of like little under the hood type things that have been reported to them that they've probably fixed, but they're probably things that have not affected a large chunk of users. So these are probably some of those items that maybe affected like a small fraction of 1% of their folks, and they did not put it on a list for that reason. So I suspect GoPro puts some of the major issues on the list that a lot of people reported to them, and then these other ones are just those tiny ones that they haven't really seen from a lot of people. So if you did have an issue that wasn't on this list, after you do this firmware update, I definitely encourage you to check it out, see if it fixed that for you. And then the second category here is usability improvements. And this time there was only one item under there, but this one item probably encompasses a lot of items too, just like the other bug fixes. And I feel like almost every single GoPro firmware update has this on there. And this is the general user interface and performance improvements. So sometimes this might be like a slight change in design in the UI on here. In other words, the menus might look slightly different. Not necessarily a rewording or anything, but sometimes the color contrast might be a little bit different. Maybe the border is adjusted slightly on a menu. The font size could be slightly bigger. Little things like that. Sometimes GoPro has optimized the touchscreen capabilities. Sometimes they've made it a little more sensitive or a little less sensitive. So those are the type of things I would expect from that. Now playing around with this, I haven't really noticed any differences with anything in the menu. Everything looks the same to me. It seems to be as responsive, if not maybe a little bit more responsive than before the firmware update. So if that's the case, that would be good. Everything seems to be working as well or better after the firmware update. So that's great to see. It doesn't look like anything got broken. That is always a good thing to see. So that sums it up there. If you haven't upgraded firmware on your GoPro before, I have created a video that's dedicated to showing you how to do that. I've linked to it above if you want to check it out. So it's exciting to see this major firmware update, and I have tested it out extensively. So far, I have not seen any issues that were caused by the firmware update. So hopefully that will continue to be the case. Until we talk again, happy GoProing.